Hi, I'm Corey Driver, and this is Moving Forward. So this week we are in Matthew 20, talking about a parable of the kingdom, and this one's the parable of the landowner and the day laborers. This one's really exciting and actually kind of close to my heart. So the parable goes that there's a landowner who has a vineyard and hires folks during the early hours of the day, probably around 6 o'clock, maybe around sunrise, to go and work the vineyards, agreeing to pay them the usual price. Without additional work, the landowner then goes back to the labor market of day laborers at about 9 o'clock and says, hey, you guys come work too, and then returns at noon, at 3, and 5 p.m., and keeps bringing people back to work at the vineyard without additional need. And then at the end of the day, agrees to pay, or sends the manager to pay, with the folks hired last to be paid first. They're paid the full day's wages. And so the folks who are hired early on think, ooh, we're going to get some extra. But as it turns out, they don't get extra. And then there's a little bit of a disagreement. And then the parable finishes. Now let's cycle back. Most of us probably watching this video are not super familiar with the day labor marketplace. But this occurs every day all around the world, even in the midst of pandemic, where folks get up super early and go to a hangout place, wherever it is, that is known by employers who simply cruise on by and pick up as much work as they need for the day in the form of humans who are going to do that work. And they get paid for their wages. And I've seen this around the world. Most notably outside the Home Depot in Atlanta on Ponce, but also certainly in Morocco in the Takadum neighborhood of Rabat. Folks just get up and they go and they want to get hired for the day. And a lot of times they're foreigners, sometimes people without papers, and they're looking to get hired. And the strongest, the folks that you know, like that are reliable, get hired first. And then once the sun comes up, most days, that's it. Nobody else is getting hired. But sometimes somebody will come back at like 9 or maybe even noon, to say, hey, we got some extra work, or we need some extra help. So you come, and whoever's left in the marketplace goes. And then certainly by noon, there's nobody left in the marketplace. Maybe just 1 or 2 people who literally don't have anything else to do, and just have no prospects for the day and don't want to return to wherever it is that they're sleeping. So they just wait in the marketplace. And, there might be something that comes up in the afternoon, like, hey, somebody got hurt, we need you to help out, or we had a last minute order come in, so we need some additional work. But that's very, very rare. And that's not what happens in the story, in the gospel that Jesus tells. There's the landowner who has no need for additional work. Nothing has come up. The field hasn't grown in size. It is only that this is a very generous landowner. And so he goes out and he hires people again and again and again. And he's cutting into his profits. It makes no sense. You knew how big the vineyard was in the morning when you hired the first folk, but he keeps going back. And eventually he clears out the marketplace of all the folks who are trying to get hired. And the really touching scene in this parable, there's 2 that really stick out to me. The touching scene is he asks the people who are still there late in the day, it's maybe almost sunset, why aren't you working? And they reply, no one's hired us. They've been there faithful all day, through the desperation and the frustration and the disappointment of hoping that anybody would hire them, and they're still there at the end of the day, having waited at least, 12-ish hours. And why aren't you working? Because nobody hired us. It's not their lack of willingness. And I wonder what that teaches us about evangelism and inviting people into the Jesus community, right? There are a lot of folk, I have to believe, who are not experiencing the warmth of and trials of Christian community simply because nobody's invited them, right? They're not against it, but they just haven't heard a warm invitation. Or maybe there's been a lot of people accusing them or yelling at them, but haven't had an invitation to the feast, an invitation to the working feast, because as everybody knows, hopefully, being called to participate in the kingdom is not simply sitting down at a feast, though it should be that, but it is also being called to work, to labor on behalf of the great King for the harvest of justice and righteousness. And we'll talk about that more. Probably not this week. So there's that moment where the king, or the landowner, goes out to the labor market and finally collects everyone who's still wanting to be hired. And then the payment at the end of the day. And so the people who only worked for maybe an hour, maybe even a few minutes, get paid the full day's labor. And then the folks who have actually been working the full day say, wait a minute, we've worked in the hot of the sun and we are only getting the same amount. You have made them, they say to the landlord, you have made these people who've worked only a little bit equal to us. And isn't that exactly the point? That is the work of the kingdom. If we earned our way in, if we were selected because of what we've done and what we haven't done, there would be no element of grace to it at all. And grace is the whole thing. The kingdom of God, Jesus's love and salvific work, makes everyone equal to everyone else, because we are all saved by a gracious landlord who invites us into the kingdom harvest. And that's the point of the parable. And Jesus has the landowner ask in the parable, are you jealous because I am gracious? Hope not. It's hard to be. Hard not to be, maybe. But God's graciousness goes way beyond any notions of human fairness and who deserves to belong and who doesn't, and who gets invited and when and what repayment. No, that's not how the kingdom of heaven works. The kingdom of heaven works because Jesus and God go out into the world and say, come, we'll take care of you. And those who have been participating for a long time have a lot of labor to do. And those who are called just at the very end, not so much labor to do. But the reward is the same because God has made us all equals. And that is good news.